The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Rita Hayes pushed her yellow mop bucket down the empty hallway. It was 2 in the morning, and the Galactic Embassy complex was quiet except for the squeaking wheels of her cart. She'd been doing this job for 3 years now, cleaning up after aliens and diplomats who barely noticed she existed. Rita didn't mind being invisible. At 52, she'd learned that honest work was honest work, and the overnight shift paid an extra $2 an hour. Tonight she had the Valerian Imperial Suite on her schedule. The Valorians had arrived on Earth about 6 months ago, part of some big peace treaty that Rita didn't fully understand. She'd seen them a few times from a distance, tall creatures with skin that looked like colored glass, shimmering under the lights. They were neat guests which she appreciated. Some of the other alien delegations left messes that made her wonder if they had cleaning crews back on their home worlds. She swiped her badge at the suite entrance and the door slid open with a soft hiss. The main room stretched out in front of her, all polished floors and strange furniture that looked more like art than anything you'd actually sit on. Rita had learned not to question alien interior design. She'd once spent 20 minutes trying to figure out if something was a chair or a religious artifact before deciding it was safer to just mop around it. She filled her bucket at the utility sink, added the cleaning solution, and started in the far corner like always. There was something calming about mopping, the way you could see your progress in the clean streaks across the floor. Dip the mop, wring it out, push it forward, pull it back. Dip, wring, push, pull. Her mind wandered to her daughter back in Ohio, who'd called yesterday to say the grandkids were asking when Grandma Rita was going to visit. Soon, Rita had promised, though she wasn't sure when she'd be able to afford the plane ticket. That's when she heard it. A sound that made her stop mid-swipe, water dripping from her mop onto the floor she'd just cleaned. A baby crying. Rita stood completely still, listening. There it was again, thin and desperate, the kind of cry that went straight to something deep in your chest if you'd ever been a parent. She'd raised 2 kids of her own, and that sound was unmistakable. A baby in distress. But there weren't supposed to be any babies here. The briefing packet said the Emperor was in residence with some staff, nothing about children. Rita looked around the empty suite, wondering if she was hearing things. The night shift did that to you sometimes, made you hear voices in the hum of the ventilation system. Then the cry came again, weaker this time, and Rita knew it was real. "Hello," she called out, her voice sounding small in the big room. "Is someone there?" No answer except another wavering cry, coming from somewhere down the hall to her left. Rita knew she probably shouldn't investigate. She was cleared for the main areas only, not the private quarters. But that was a baby crying, and every instinct she had was screaming at her to find out why. She left her mop bucket and followed the sound down a corridor lined with doors. The crying got louder as she approached the last door on the right. Rita tried the handle, expecting it to be locked, but it swung open easily. The room beyond was dim, lit only by some kind of glowing panel in the ceiling that pulsed with soft purple light. And there, in the middle of the room in a cradle that actually floated in the air, was the source of the crying. Rita's breath caught. The baby was small, maybe 6 months old if you measured in human terms, but definitely not human. His skin flickered between purple and silver like heat lightning, and she could feel warmth radiating from him even from several feet away. His tiny face was scrunched up in misery, tears streaming down his cheeks, and his little fists were batting at the air. "Oh, sweetie," Rita whispered, looking around frantically. "Where's your mama? Where's anybody?" The room was empty except for her and the crying baby. No caretakers, no parents, no one. The baby's cries were getting higher pitched, and Rita noticed the windows starting to vibrate. She remembered reading something about Valorians communicating through frequencies. Was this baby crying in a pitch that actually hurt to hear? Rita stood there for maybe 10 seconds, torn between following the rules and doing what felt right. She was just the cleaning lady. This was probably the alien emperor's kid, someone incredibly important. If she touched him and something went wrong, she'd lose her job for sure. Maybe worse. The baby wailed again, a sound so heartbroken it made Rita's eyes sting. Rules could wait. She stepped up to the floating cradle and carefully, gently, slid her hands under the baby's small body. He was lighter than she expected and hot to the touch, but not burning. The moment she lifted him up and settled him against her shoulder, supporting his head the way she'd done thousands of times with her own babies, the crying stopped. Just like that. Instant silence. The baby took one big shuddering breath and then relaxed completely against her, his small body going limp in that way babies do when they finally feel safe. Rita started swaying without thinking about it, that automatic rocking motion every parent knows. She began humming too, an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing. Something about hush little baby and mockingbirds. "There you go," she murmured softly. You're okay now. You're okay. The baby made a small sound, almost like a cat purring, and she felt him cooling down under her hands. His breathing evened out and his tiny fingers grabbed onto her uniform shirt, holding on tight. Within minutes, his eyes started closing. All four of them Rita noticed with a little jolt. 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his small face. She kept swaying, kept humming, watching this alien baby fall asleep in her arms. It felt surreal and perfectly natural at the same time. A baby was a baby, didn't matter what planet they came from. They all needed to be held. They all needed to know someone cared. "Where's your people, little one?" Rita whispered. "Why were you all alone in here?" Then she heard shouting from the main suite, voices speaking in a language that sounded like wind chimes mixed with thunder. Running footsteps, lots of them, getting closer fast. Rita's heart started pounding, but she didn't move. She just held the baby close and stayed calm, because babies could sense fear and she didn't want him waking up scared again. The door burst open and suddenly Rita was facing a dozen armed guards, all pointing weapons that glowed with blue light straight at her. Rita's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her voice steady and low. The baby was still sleeping against her shoulder, and that mattered more than the glowing weapons pointed at her face. She'd never seen guns like these before, all sleek metal and pulsing blue light, but she understood the universal language of danger well enough. "He was crying," she said quietly, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "I heard him crying and nobody came. He needed someone." The guards stood frozen, their weapons still raised but nobody firing. They were staring at the baby in her arms like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. One of them, taller than the others with deep purple skin that shimmered under the lights, touched something on his wrist and started speaking rapidly in Valerian. The language sounded urgent, almost panicked. More footsteps echoed from the hallway, these ones heavier and more measured. Rita could feel them through the floor. The guards suddenly straightened, their postures going rigid, and she knew without being told that someone important was coming. She adjusted her grip on the sleeping baby, making sure his head was supported, and waited. The Emperor had to duck to get through the doorway. Rita had seen him once before, from a distance during some official ceremony she'd been cleaning up after. He'd seemed big then, but up close he was massive. Nearly 8 feet tall, with skin that gleamed silver and gold like he was carved from precious metals. He wore flowing robes that seemed to move on their own, and his 4 eyes blazed with an intensity that made Rita want to look away. But she didn't. She'd never been good at backing down, even when she probably should. The Emperor stopped dead when he saw his son. His eyes went wide and his mouth opened slightly, and for a second he looked less like a powerful alien ruler and more like any exhausted parent who'd been up for days with a sick child. Rita recognized that expression. She'd worn it herself plenty of times. "How?" The word came out in perfect English, though there was something underneath it, some kind of vibration that made Rita's teeth ache. "How are you doing this?" Rita glanced down at the sleeping prince, then back at the Emperor. "Doing what, exactly?" "He was crying real bad, so I picked him up and rocked him. That's pretty much it." The Emperor moved closer, his movements careful like he was approaching something fragile and precious. "For 5 days, he said, and his voice cracked just slightly, "my son has screamed. 5 of your Earth days without stopping. Our best doctors have examined him. Our empaths have tried to reach him. We have specialists who have studied infant care for centuries. Nothing worked. He burns with fever. He cries until the windows crack. He will not eat. He will not sleep. And you, a human, you simply pick him up." "Well," Rita said, choosing her words carefully, "yeah, that's what you do when a baby cries. You pick them up. You let them know they're not alone." One of the guards made a sound like breaking glass, but the Emperor held up one hand and the room went silent. He stepped even closer, close enough that Rita could see the patterns in his crystalline skin, like looking at opals catching the light. He was studying his son's face with such raw relief that Rita felt her eyes getting damp. "What is your name, human?" the Emperor asked softly. "Rita Hayes, Your Majesty. I work for the cleaning company. 3rd shift. Rita Hayes." He repeated it slowly like he was committing it to memory. "I will pay you $1 million to stay with my son tonight. To hold him as you are holding him now. To keep him sleeping and peaceful." Rita's mind went blank for a second. $1 million. That was enough money to retire, to help her kids pay off their student loans, to finally get that surgery her son needed for his back. It was more money than she'd ever dreamed of having. Her mouth went dry and her hands started trembling slightly. "I'll do it," she heard herself say. "But not because of the money. I mean, the money is incredible and thank you, but that's not why. I just can't walk away from a baby who needs help. Doesn't matter if he's human or Valerian or anything else. A baby's a baby. The Emperor stared at her for a long moment, all four of his eyes fixed on her face. Then he did something that made every guard in the room gasp. He bowed. It wasn't a deep bow, just a slight inclination of his head, but Rita understood it was significant. You didn't get to be a 52-year-old cleaning lady without learning to read body language. Then I am in your debt, Rita Hayes of Earth, the Emperor said formally. My son's life is worth more than all the wealth of my empire. You have given me back something I thought I had lost. The next hour was a blur. The guards brought in a comfortable chair and positioned it next to the floating cradle. Someone appeared with water and some kind of food that looked like purple bread, though Rita was too nervous to eat much. The Emperor dismissed most of the guards but kept two stationed by the door, and he himself settled into a corner where he could watch. Rita sat there holding Prince Kael'vor as she learned his name was, rocking slowly and humming her grandmother's old lullabies. She told him stories too, keeping her voice low and soothing. She talked about her kids when they were babies, about the way her daughter used to fight sleep until she'd finally crash in the middle of playing. She told him about Ohio winters and how the snow would pile up so high you couldn't see the mailbox. She described summer fireflies and the smell of fresh-cut grass and her granddaughter's laugh. The prince slept through all of it, his breathing deep and even, his fever cooling under her touch. Every so often Rita would shift position to keep her arms from going completely numb, and each time the baby would make a small sound and nestle closer to her. The Emperor didn't sleep. He just watched, occasionally speaking quietly with his guards or checking some kind of glowing tablet device. Rita caught him looking at her several times with an expression she couldn't quite read. Curiosity maybe, or confusion, or something else entirely. Dawn came slowly, the darkness outside the windows gradually giving way to gray and then pale gold. Rita's back ached and her arms felt like they might fall off, but the prince was still sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. She'd never been so tired or so scared in her entire life. This was way beyond her experience, holding an alien prince worth more than entire planets while his father watched her every move. I should probably try to put him down now, Rita whispered to the Emperor. Let you hold your own son. The Emperor rose from his corner and approached slowly, his hands outstretched. Rita stood carefully, every muscle in her body protesting, and began the delicate process of transferring the sleeping prince from her arms to his father's. The second Prince Kael'vor left Rita's embrace, his four eyes snapped open and he started screaming. It wasn't the weak, pained crying from before. This was pure terror, loud enough to make Rita's ears ring. The windows rattled in their frames. A drinking glass on a nearby table exploded into fragments. The Emperor's face twisted with anguish as he tried everything to calm his son, but Kael'vor only screamed louder, his small hands reaching desperately back toward Rita. Give him back, the Emperor commanded, and Rita quickly took the baby back into her arms. The screaming cut off instantly. Kael'vor pressed his face into Rita's neck, making that purring sound again, his whole body relaxing. Rita stood there, stunned, looking at the Emperor over the prince's head. They stared at each other in complete silence. This is impossible, the Emperor finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. You are human. My son is Valerian. There is no medical reason, no scientific explanation for why he would bond with you. Rita gently patted the prince's back, feeling him settle more deeply into sleep. Babies don't really care about science, Your Majesty. They just know who makes them feel safe. By noon the next day, Rita's entire life had been turned upside down. She'd called her supervisor at the cleaning company from the Valerian suite, trying to explain why she wouldn't be finishing her shift. That conversation had gone about as well as you'd expect when you tell your boss you're holding an alien prince who won't let you leave. They'd hung up on her twice before the Emperor himself got on the line to make it official. Now Rita stood in what she'd been told were her new quarters, a room bigger than her entire apartment back home, trying to process what was happening. Her belongings had been retrieved, her lease paid off, and she'd been moved into a suite connected directly to the prince's nursery. The salary they'd quoted her was so high she'd actually laughed, thinking it was a translation error. It wasn't. This is insane, she muttered to herself, looking around at furniture that probably cost more than her car. Through the open doorway she could see Prince Kael'vor sleeping in his floating cradle, finally peaceful after she'd spent another 3 hours getting him to settle down. I'm a janitor from Cleveland. I don't know how to be a royal nanny. But the prince didn't seem to care about her qualifications. He only cared that she showed up and held him when he needed it. The trouble started almost immediately. Rita learned fast that the Valerian court was not happy about the situation. The other staff members were polite to her face, but she could feel their resentment. She'd hear them speaking in Valerian when they thought she couldn't understand, their tones making it clear they were talking about her. The human. The cleaning woman. The nobody who somehow became essential to their future emperor. The first attempt on her life was subtle enough that she almost missed it. Someone sent her a gift basket of Earth foods, supposedly from a diplomatic friend. Rita had been about to eat one of the chocolates when Prince Calvor, who she'd been holding at the time, started crying and squirming away from the basket. One of the more sympathetic guards had the food analyzed and found enough poison to kill 3 humans. The second attempt was less subtle. A piece of equipment in her quarters malfunctioned, filling the room with toxic gas while she slept. She would have died if Prince Calvor hadn't started screaming in the next room, waking her up in time to stumble out into the hallway. After that, the Emperor assigned her personal guards, 2 Valorians named Vec and Tora who followed her everywhere. Rita hated it at first, the constant surveillance, but she had to admit she felt safer. And Vec turned out to have a dry sense of humor that reminded her of her late husband. "Why do they hate me so much?" Rita asked Tora one evening, after another day of cold stares and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. "I didn't ask for any of this." Tora, whose skin was a deep blue that shifted to green in certain lights, considered the question carefully. "You are human," she said finally. "Many of my people believe humans are lesser. Primitive. The idea that our prince, our future ruler, would need a human more than he needs his own kind, it challenges everything they believe about Valerian superiority." "That's ridiculous," Rita said. "I'm not doing anything special. I'm just being kind to a baby." "Perhaps," Tora replied, "that is exactly what makes them uncomfortable." Rita's days fell into a routine of sorts. She'd wake up early, usually because Prince Calvor started fussing around dawn. She'd change him, feed him the special formula the Valerian doctors had developed, and then spend hours just holding him or playing with him. She talked to him constantly in English, figuring he might as well learn the language. She told him about Earth, about animals and oceans and mountains. She showed him pictures of dogs and cats on her phone, and he'd squeal with delight at the images. The Emperor visited every day, usually in the evening. At first these visits were formal and awkward, but gradually they became more relaxed. Rita learned that the Emperor's name was Jathic, though she still called him Your Majesty because that felt safer. He'd sit and watch her with his son, asking questions about human child-rearing practices that seemed genuinely curious rather than judgmental. "Why do you sing to him?" Jathic asked one evening after Rita had finished a lullaby about Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. "Music soothes babies," Rita explained, gently bouncing Calvor on her knee. "It's rhythmic and predictable, and I think it makes them feel secure. Plus, it's how my grandmother helped me feel loved when I was little. I'm just passing that along." "We do not sing in Valerian culture," Jathic said slowly. "We communicate, we command, we debate. But singing for joy or comfort, this is not something we do." "Well," Rita said, smiling down at the prince, "maybe that's something young Calvor here can teach your people someday." The Emperor looked at his son, who was babbling happily and grabbing at Rita's fingers, and something shifted in his expression. "You have been here 6 months now, Rita Hayes. My son thrives under your care. He laughs. He plays. He learns. Our physicians say he is healthier than any Valerian infant they have recorded." "He's a good baby," Rita said fondly. "Smart too. He's already starting to understand simple words in both English and Valerian." "The High Council demands an audience with me tomorrow," Jathic said, his voice going flat. "They wish to discuss the situation with my son. They have brought in a neural specialist." Something in his tone made Rita's stomach drop. "What kind of specialist?" "One who can sever emotional bonds," the Emperor said quietly. "They believe Calvor's attachment to you is unnatural. Dangerous. They say it makes him weak, dependent on a lesser species. They want to break the connection by force." Rita's arms tightened protectively around the prince. "That would traumatize him. He's just a baby. You can't mess with a baby's brain because you don't like who he's bonded with." "I know," Jathic said, and he sounded tired. Tired in a way that went beyond just needing sleep. "But I am Emperor of 17 worlds. I have responsibilities beyond my son. The Council believes this attachment will make him unfit to rule. They say a Valerian Emperor cannot show weakness, cannot need anyone, especially not a human." "With all due respect, Your Majesty," Rita said carefully, "that sounds like a pretty lonely way to live." The Emperor studied her for a long moment. "My people conquered half the galaxy through strength and logic. Emotion is considered a liability. Attachment is viewed as weakness. What you call love, we have spent centuries training ourselves not to feel. And how's that working out for you? Rita asked, then immediately worried she'd overstepped. But Jothic didn't look angry. If anything, he looked thoughtful. I will speak with the council, he said finally. But Rita, you should know that they are powerful. If they insist on this procedure, I may not be able to stop them. That night Rita couldn't sleep. She sat in the garden connected to the Imperial Suite, watching Earth's moon rise over the city skyline. Prince Kael'vor was sleeping peacefully in her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket. She'd gotten used to holding him for hours at a time. Her arms had actually gotten stronger. I'm just the help, kiddo, she whispered to the sleeping prince. I always knew this was temporary. I'm nobody special. Just a cleaning lady who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't really true. She'd become attached to this little alien baby with his 4 eyes and his crystalline skin and his delighted giggles when she made funny faces. He felt like hers now, in the way that only someone who's cared for a child can understand. Tomorrow the council would try to take that away. And Rita, who'd spent her whole life being invisible and unimportant, was going to have to figure out how to fight back. The High Council arrived at dawn, and Rita knew immediately they meant business. She watched from the nursery window as 12 Valerian officials swept through the embassy entrance, their robes gleaming with metallic threads that marked their status. They looked ancient and powerful, their crystalline skin darker than most Valorians she'd met, ranging from deep emerald to almost black. These were people used to being obeyed without question. Rita had dressed carefully that morning, choosing her nicest clothes, though next to Valerian court officials she still looked like exactly what she was. A middle-aged woman from Ohio who was way out of her depth. She'd braided her graying hair and put on the simple silver necklace her daughter had given her for her birthday. Small acts of normalcy to keep herself grounded. Prince Kael'vor sensed her tension. He'd been fussy all morning, clinging to her and making worried sounds whenever she tried to set him down even for a moment. At 8 months old now he was getting heavier, but Rita barely noticed anymore. She'd carried him so much that it felt wrong when her arms were empty. It's okay, sweetie, she murmured, swaying gently. Everything's going to be okay. She wasn't sure if she was reassuring him or herself. Emperor Jothic came to her quarters an hour before the council meeting. His face was composed, but Rita had learned to read the small signs of his distress. The way his lower set of eyes dimmed slightly. The tension in his shoulders. They will want to see you, he said without preamble. To observe the bond. To justify their decision. And what is their decision? Rita asked, though she already knew. They have brought Dr. Velmoth, the finest neural specialist in our empire. He can dissolve emotional connections at the synaptic level. The procedure takes only moments and leaves no physical damage. Jothic paused. To the body at least. But what about the damage to his heart? Rita said quietly. What about his trust? He's a baby. He doesn't understand politics or empires or any of this. He just knows I'm the person who makes him feel safe. If you rip that away from him suddenly, that's going to hurt him in ways your scanners won't be able to measure. I know, the Emperor said, and the pain in his voice was real. But the Council believes this is necessary. They say I have become too soft, too influenced by human sentiment. They remind me that I rule 17 worlds and command fleets that could destroy planets. They say a ruler who cannot even control his own infant son is unfit to lead. That's not fair, Rita protested. You're a good father. You visit him every day. You ask about his development. You actually care about him being happy, not just being some perfect little heir. Caring is the problem, Jothic replied. Valorians are not supposed to care. We are supposed to be logical, strategic, superior. Your species introduced emotion back into my son's life. The Council views this as contamination. An aide appeared in the doorway, speaking rapid Valerian. The Emperor nodded and turned back to Rita. It is time. The council chamber was intimidating by design. 12 high-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle, all elevated so the occupants looked down on anyone standing before them. Rita walked in carrying Prince Kael'vor, flanked by her guards Vec and Tora. The Emperor took his own seat, separate from but equal to the council, his face an unreadable mask. The head counselor, an ancient Valerian woman named Corisa whose skin was so dark it appeared almost obsidian, spoke first. Her voice carried the weight of centuries. Human Rita Hayes, you stand before this council because you have formed an inappropriate attachment with Prince Kael'vor, heir to the Valerian Empire. This bond threatens his development into a proper Valerian ruler. Do you deny this? Rita took a breath. I don't deny that we're attached. But I do deny that it's inappropriate or threatening. He's a baby who needed someone to care for him and I did. That's all. That is not all, another counselor interjected, a male with deep purple skin marked with silver patterns. You have made our future emperor dependent on a human. You have weakened him with your primitive concepts of comfort and affection. A Valerian ruler must be strong, independent, unemotional. He's 8 months old, Rita said, unable to keep the frustration from her voice. He's supposed to be dependent. That's how babies work. They depend on caregivers who love them, and through that love they learn to trust the world. Eventually that trust becomes independence. But you can't skip the first part and expect healthy results. You presume to lecture this council on child development? Corisa's tone was ice cold. I presume to speak common sense, Rita replied. I've raised 2 kids of my own. They turned out pretty good. Both of them are kind, hard-working people who contribute to their communities. And you know what? They were clingy babies too. They needed to be held. They cried when I left the room. But I didn't see that as weakness. I saw it as them learning that they were loved. A younger counselor, whose name Rita hadn't caught, leaned forward. Love is not a Valerian concept. It makes one vulnerable. It clouds judgment. Our empire was built on logic and strength, not sentiment. And how's that working out? Rita asked. Because from where I'm standing, you've got an empire so afraid of emotion that you couldn't even comfort your own prince when he was sick. It took a human janitor to figure out that he just needed to be held. The chamber erupted in angry Valerian, multiple counselors speaking at once. Corisa raised one hand and silence fell immediately. Enough. Dr. Velmoth, proceed with your assessment. A Valerian male Rita hadn't noticed before stepped forward from the shadows. He carried a device that looked like a silver headband covered in glowing nodes. If the council permits, I will demonstrate. The procedure is painless and quick. The prince will simply cease to feel attachment to this human. He will be free to bond appropriately with Valerian caretakers. Free? Rita held Kael'vor tighter. You mean you'll erase me from his memory? Make him forget the person who's cared for him every day for 6 months. The neural pathways will be dissolved, Dr. Velmoth said clinically. He will retain no conscious memory of you. It is the kindest method. Kindest? Rita's voice rose. You're going to mess with a baby's brain and you call that kind? It is kinder than allowing him to grow weak, Corisa said. The procedure will happen at sunset tomorrow. You may spend today saying your farewells. The council has spoken. No. The word came from Emperor Jathic, who had been silent until now. He stood, and even among these ancient powerful beings, his presence commanded attention. The council has spoken, but I have not. Corisa's eyes narrowed. Your Majesty, you cannot be suggesting. I am not suggesting. I am declaring. Jathic stepped down from his seat and walked to where Rita stood. He looked at his son, who had been remarkably quiet through the proceedings, almost like he understood something important was happening. For 6 months I have watched Rita Hayes care for my son. And I have learned something that I believe this council has forgotten. And what is that? Corisa asked coldly. That strength without compassion is not strength at all. It is merely brutality. Jathic gently touched his son's head, and Kael'vor reached up to grab his father's finger. My son does not just survive under Rita's care. He thrives. He laughs. He explores. He trusts. These are not weaknesses. These are the foundations of true leadership. You would make our empire soft, another counselor protested. I would make our empire wise, Jathic countered. We have conquered through force. But we have never built lasting peace. Perhaps that is because we have forgotten how to value connection over dominance. He turned to face the full council. Rita Hayes will remain as my son's guardian. She will be granted full diplomatic status and all rights thereof. And if any member of this council or anyone else attempts to harm her or interfere with her care of Prince Kael'vor, they will answer to me personally. Retraced. 10 years changed everything and nothing at all. Rita still woke up early most mornings, though now it was by choice rather than necessity. Her quarters in the Valerian diplomatic residence had become home in a way she never expected. Pictures of her kids and grandkids covered one wall, right next to holographic images of Prince Kael'vor at various ages. Her daughter had visited 3 times, and her son had finally gotten that back surgery, paid for by the generous salary Rita still felt slightly guilty about accepting. The galaxy knew her name now, though Rita wished they didn't. She'd been featured in documentaries, interviewed by journalists from 40 different worlds, and once accidentally started a diplomatic incident by telling a reporter that most politicians could benefit from spending a week doing honest manual labor. The Emperor had laughed about that one for days. But the real change wasn't in Rita's life. It was in the young man who bounded into her sitting room that morning, nearly knocking over her coffee. Rita. Did you see the news from the Kelvin sector? Prince Kael'vor was 18 now in human years, tall and lean with crystalline skin that shifted between silver and blue depending on his mood. He wore simple clothes rather than formal robes, something that still irritated the more traditional members of court. The mining dispute we mediated last month? Both sides signed the peace agreement. No one died. No threats, no shows of force, just actual communication. Rita smiled over her coffee mug. I did see that. Good work, kiddo. It was your idea, Kael'vor said, settling into the chair across from her with the casual ease of someone who'd grown up in this room. You said that most conflicts come from people not feeling heard. So instead of showing up with warships, we showed up with mediators. We actually listened to what both sides needed. I said a lot of things over the years, Rita replied. You're the one who figured out how to apply them to running an empire. It was true. Prince Kael'vor had grown into someone Rita barely recognized from the screaming infant she'd first held a decade ago. He was brilliant and strategic like his father, but he'd also developed something the Valerian Empire had never seen in air before. Empathy. Genuine concern for people beyond their strategic value. The ability to see individuals rather than just populations. The High Council had fought it every step of the way. But Emperor Jathic had held firm, and gradually something remarkable had happened. The prince who'd been raised partially by a human janitor had started changing how the Valerian Empire interacted with the rest of the galaxy. There were still conflicts, still wars in distant sectors, still all the messy complications of 17 worlds trying to coexist. But there were also new treaties, new alliances, new ways of resolving disputes that didn't always end in bloodshed. And most shocking of all, other species had started to trust Valerian leadership in ways they never had before. The Kelvin ambassador asked about you, Kael'vor said, pulling up a holographic display from his wrist device. She wanted to know if the stories were true. If you really were just a cleaning woman when you became my guardian. What did you tell her? Rita asked. I told her you still are just a cleaning woman technically. You just happen to clean up diplomatic messes now instead of floors. Kael'vor grinned at her. She didn't believe me until I showed her the video of you mopping the corridor outside the council chamber last week. Rita shrugged. There was a spill. Nobody else was handling it. What was I supposed to do, just leave it there for someone to slip on? Most people in your position would consider mopping beneath their dignity, Kael'vor pointed out. Most people in my position are silly, then. Honest work is honest work, doesn't matter if you're scrubbing floors or negotiating treaties. Rita set down her coffee and studied the young prince. You didn't come here just to talk about the Kelvin peace deal. What's on your mind? Kael'vor's expression shifted, becoming more serious. Father wants to start transition protocols. He says I'm ready to take more official duties. Within 5 years I'll likely be crowned emperor. And how do you feel about that? Rita asked gently. Terrified, Kael'vor admitted. Rita, I'm different from every Valerian ruler in our history. I actually care what happens to the people we govern. I want peace more than conquest. The traditionalists already call me weak. They say I'm too influenced by human sentiment, that I'll destroy everything our empire built. Do you believe them? Sometimes, he said quietly. When I can't sleep at night and I'm thinking about all the ways I could fail. When I remember that billions of lives will depend on my decisions. Yeah, sometimes I think they might be right. Rita got up and moved to sit beside him, the same way she'd done thousands of times when he was younger and needed comfort. Let me tell you something I learned from raising my own kids. Being scared you'll mess up means you actually care about doing it right. It's the people who are never scared, who think they have all the answers, those are the ones you have to worry about. But what if caring isn't enough? Kael'vor asked. What if the Empire needs a ruler who can make hard choices without emotion getting in the way? The Empire needs a ruler who can make hard choices while still remembering that those choices affect real people, Rita corrected. Emotion isn't the enemy of good leadership. Lack of empathy is. Your father understood that when he decided to let me stay. He saw that your ability to connect with others, to actually care about their well-being, that wasn't making you weak. It was making you wise. Kael'vor was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he asked, did you ever think back when you were just mopping floors at the embassy that you'd end up here? Advising the future emperor of 17 worlds. Rita laughed. Honey, I thought I'd end up retiring to a small house in Florida and spending my days playing bingo. Shows you what I know about planning. But you changed everything, Kael'vor insisted. Not just for me but for our whole approach to diplomacy. There are species that trust us now because of the changes you inspired. The Council of United Worlds voted to include the Valerian Empire in the Peace Coalition specifically because they saw how I negotiate. And I learned that from watching you handle people. I didn't do anything special, Rita protested. I just treated you like you mattered. Like your feelings were important. That's basic human decency, not some revolutionary technique. Maybe that's exactly what made it revolutionary, Kael'vor said. Basic decency applied to galactic politics. Radical kindness in a system built on dominance. You took care of one crying baby, and somehow that changed how an entire empire thinks about power. Rita felt her eyes getting damp and tried to hide it by looking out the window. The view showed New York City stretched out below, Earth's moon visible even in daylight. I just showed up when you needed someone. Any decent person would have done the same. But they didn't, Kael'vor said softly. All those trained caretakers, all those specialists and experts. They tried to stop the crying or fix the problem or follow protocols. You just held me and made me feel safe. That's the difference. There was a knock at the door, and Emperor Jathic entered without waiting for an answer. He'd aged well over the decade, his crystalline skin now threaded with veins of gold that marked wisdom in Valerian culture. I thought I might find you here, my son. We have the trade delegation arriving in 2 hours. I know, father. I was just consulting with my advisor. Kael'vor stood, his formal posture returning. But then he did something that still made the traditional courtiers uncomfortable. He hugged Rita, quick and genuine. Thank you. For everything. Always. After he left, Jathic lingered in the doorway. He will be a remarkable emperor. He already is remarkable, Rita said. You both are. You chose to let him be raised with love instead of just discipline. That took courage. It took your example, Jathic replied. The council was right about one thing, Rita Hayes. You did make my son different from every Valerian ruler before him. You made him better. That evening, as Rita sat in her quarters going through her correspondence, she found a message from her granddaughter. The kid was applying to colleges and wanted advice. Rita smiled and started typing a response, talking about following your passions and not being afraid of hard work and always treating people with kindness no matter their status. Basic lessons. Simple wisdom. The kind of thing any grandmother might say. But somewhere in the galaxy, those same lessons were being applied to peace treaties and trade negotiations and decisions that affected billions of lives. All because one night, a cleaning woman from Ohio had heard a baby crying and decided to pick him up. Rita finished her message and looked at the pictures on her wall. Her family on Earth. The Valerian royal family who'd become her family too. The life she'd built from one simple choice. She'd been just mopping floors. And then she'd been everything. Retry.